Day 739 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 417,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 1,150 in the past 24 hours. So some consistently high daily figures there, as you might expect with increased activity over the last month. And speaking of which, February actually turned out to be the biggest month for Russian losses on record, 29,000. Just utterly staggering. Then as for hardware losses, 9 tanks, 21 APVs and 22 artillery. But maybe even more than that, we should be occasionally tracking Russia's National Wealth Fund values as well. Because in this instance, you can see Russia's actual cash money liquid assets portfolio, which was a figure of about 150 billion US dollars worth back at the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but has now dropped to about $50 billion worth. So at that current burn rate of about 4.4 billion per month, Russia's national wealth fund will be gone in 12 months. Then we'll head back to the map, although I want to firstly make an added mention on all of those Russian losses in the sky from recently, as we also came across some very revealing messages from Russian telegrammers, ones with links to the Russian VKS, as it showed that Russian pilots in Ukraine are not in a good mood. And why is this? Well, many Russian pilots have been refusing to perform missions, no surprises there, and subsequently they were threatened by their commanders as a result, and following those threats, it's been mentioned that events of sabotage have been taking place amongst the ranks of the Russian Air Force, be it through somehow rendering their planes inoperable or dropping their fab kit munitions before they ever reach the front lines, which is something we've already seen from time to time. So it appears just like we've imagined it to be in the past, angry commanders forcing their pilots to perform these offensive sorties, which ends up with, as per this message, the irretrievable losses of experienced fighter pilots. And also in the mix, they state in this message that they won't provide the numbers of aircraft losses for OPSEC reasons, but they do state that the losses are, quote, we're not talking about 1 or 2 aircraft, suggesting many more on top. Then we'll head really into the map now and start out in the Avdiivka axis, as Orlivka still manages to hold a Ukrainian presence somewhat. In fact, leading to Russian social media channels expressing their surprise. But also take note of the geography in this region, with Orlivka's southwest landlocked position as a result of lakes and rivers, which inevitably serves as a dead end at that location for the Russian forces, and I'll pop it into the satellite map just to give you a clearer picture of that one. So specifically dealing with the Duma River and its offshoots. And also looking around, and in fact zooming out, it doesn't actually get that much better with all of the other water bodies to really contend with for the offensive Russian movements. Then we'll move south as the Russian army made some advancements in Novomykhailivka, with Russian forces installing a rag or a flag and announcing that they installed it in central Novomykhailivka. Although the flag placement doesn't look like central to the settlement there, unless it's south central and facing the southern direction. And just looking at the map, you can see, or you can bet, that there's some close quarters urban warfare going on there right now. And possibly with the use of the Black Hornet nano drone, good for peeking around corners in those types of urban warfare environments. Oh, and just to give you a little bit of better context for this region and the Russian gains, so we'll click on the map and you can see the differences there, as they already held an easterly position from a couple of days earlier. Then, somewhere in the east, we saw the standard practice of the AFU finishing off an abandoned Russian T-72 tank. Then we saw a pretty dramatic frontal strike on a Russian BMP, this is an infantry fighting vehicle, from a Stugna P ATGM, so an anti-tank guided missile system of the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the Lerman direction, just to the north, near to Crimea. Then, pretty close to that, a Russian convoy of 14 pieces of equipment was destroyed near Bilorivka by the Ukrainian military from the 81st Separate Airmobile Brigade. Then also, interestingly, we saw somewhere on the Avdiivka front the destruction of a Russian T-90 tank and a T-80 tank. So T-90 on the right, T-80 on the left. 2 peas in a pod. Cooked. But hey, it's not all tanks and IFVs, as a Russian artillery piece was taken out as well, likely an older MT-12. And from the 70s, and technically they're an anti-tank gun, but also act like a short-range 100mm indirect artillery fire piece as well, up to 8 kilometers in range, so not fantastic. Then, interestingly, we also saw a Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drone or drones attack these Chinese all-terrain Desert Cross 1003 vehicles. Do note that the Russian soldiers were unharmed in this event, and it looks like this drone went for the engine hood, the bonnet, depending on your local dialect. Plus, after that, we also saw the footage of 9 Russian soldiers overcrowding the top of one of their BMP infantry fighting vehicles, with, of course, this footage coming from a Ukrainian FPV drone. Needless to say, it didn't work out great for them, not at all. So as you can tell, Russia is paying such a heavy toll in manpower and for a continuing high kit loss rate. Which means sooner or later, Russia needs to finish this war because the monumentally high loss rates for hardware is simply not sustainable. Sheer short-sighted wastefulness. And as I've always said, Russia will go hard, then go home. So they'll just continue to go hard until they run out. Then moving across to the Crimean Peninsula, as the Crimean Bridge was closed once again overnight, second night in a row, as mentioned by the local Russian authorities of the region. And this decision followed reports of explosions, marking some continued tensions in the area. Now, the specific reason for this March 4th closure was not disclosed, but hey, here, do note, as it turns out, 25% of all Russian hardware is routed through this single bridge. 25% of the stuff that makes it into the front lines of Ukraine. Therefore, this bridge is the single biggest military target that you have ever seen. Then headed across to some news for today. So Italy is recalling the SAMP-T air defense system from Slovakia, as announced by Prime Minister Robert Fico. Now, this move comes after various defense systems were temporarily stationed in Slovakia, raising concerns about the country's defensive capabilities. And the reason for the recall? Well, as Italy puts it, the air defense is needed somewhere else. And we all wonder where. Then in some other news, Germany is set to join the Czech Republic in funding ammunition for Ukraine, covering a quote-unquote significant part of the overall cost according to the German Ministry of Defense. Now this of course refers to the 800 shells that Czechia has acquired from abroad, so 300,000 122mm shells and 500,000, I have to say it, a whopping 500,000 155mm shells. And so good on Germany for jumping in like a number of other nations have already done, including the likes of Denmark, Canada, and the Netherlands, just to name a few, all as a means to get that additional available artillery shell supply, or surplus, to Ukrainian front lines. It's ready, it exists, it's good to go, just needs to be bought and paid for. You see, Ukraine is firing about 140,000 150,000 shells per month versus Russia's current shell artillery rate of 500,000 per month. So this would be a very welcome boost to Ukrainian defenses as they wait out some production delays from other nations. But hey, I'll mention more on shelling rates tomorrow with some real specifics on that front. Quite interesting stuff. Then moving across to some Russian hardware news, as it was noted that a Russian Su-57 stealth fighter jet was in Ukraine recently, about 2 weeks ago. However, it was escorted by 2 non-stealthy aircraft, a couple of Su-35s for, safe travels. Although reportedly, we've since found out that it was mostly just there to film some military propaganda film. Now, it should also be noted that these planes are basically at the prototype stage still, with about 20 or so produced. In fact, they had some real funding issues for this project, after starting it about 15 years ago. Also, good to mention now, their stealth characteristics are questionable due to a lot of the components of its design, leading many experts to ask the question of just how stealthy is it really? But ultimately, we're not going to see much of this plane in Ukraine in the foreseeable future, unless of course it's escorted by 2 more jets and they're filming some more propaganda pieces. Then in some other news, so in follow-up to the morning events for the late opposition leader in Moscow the other day, on the ground there were various chats with the attendees that were sharing their respects and grief on the day, with the main question being asked, why are you here? With replies that varied from mourning a great man to celebrating a legend to honouring a freedom fighter. And so it seems that Navalny's death has deeply touched many, symbolizing a quest for freedom that continues to inspire. And I strongly feel this is where Putin gets things wrong, as dictatorships masquerading as a democracy, or any country for that matter, should do their utmost to keep their opposition alive, because the death of a symbolic figure like this is much more often than not a catalyst for change. Then in another Russian military mobilization blunder segment today, guys, so in a call intercepted by Ukraine's military intelligence, a Russian soldier's wife has revealed the shocking situations involving newly instated members into the Russian army. As in this recently intercepted call, she said Russian conscripts are dying in training camps before they even reach Ukraine. And she went on to warn about, really warning against going to Ukraine, as she shared a story of a deployed man killed by fellow trainees. Now, oddly in this case, the deceased was experienced with previous service in Afghanistan and Chechnya. Also, the wife pointed out that this was not an isolated case by any stretch of the imagination, and that those with criminal records are also being conscripted, which is something we know very well these days too. She also said, quote, people are dying like flies before they get to Ukraine. And at this point, we've seen all sorts of mobilization blunders within the Russian military, and this is far from the first instance I've heard of mobilized men inside Russia never in fact making it to Ukraine. They truly are treated like numbers over there, pure and simple. Treated like utter garbage. And it looks like this soldier's wife is doing her bit to make it be known that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is very poorly affecting all aspects of Russian society. Then moving across to a couple of quick off-brand funnies today. So here we go. So the first one. So in a recent discussion with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, which I believe this was held in Turkey, Lavrov kept the inflammatory rhetoric on the go, seeming to threaten Moldova this time, stating that, quote, the situation is identical, referring to Moldova and Ukraine. But he also went as far as to call Moldova's government the Chisinau regime, referring to Moldova's capital in that one, as Moldova and its internationally non-recognized and Russian-backed breakaway region of Transnistria continue to have their difficulties. And I just find it completely laughable how all Russia is doing is making more and more enemies on the international stage. They categorically suck at game theory. Then headed to a super quick final funny to round things up today, guys. As Putin was on the nuclear bandwagon once again the other day. But the reason I find extremely odd. As Putin went on to warn of the risks of nuclear war if there will be NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. But here's the thing, here's the kicker, because inside of the Russian information space, since the beginning of this war, all of Russia's top propagandists, be it Solovyov or Zakharova or ET editor-in-chief Simonyan, have been saying all this time that NATO soldiers have been in Ukraine. In fact, literally just a day before Putin made this cute little speech of a warning, the director of the Information and Press Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Maria Zakharova, in fact said that NATO boots have been, quote, in Ukraine for a very long time. So what is this? Pure cognitive dissonance straight out of the Kremlin. All of which pretty much highlights lie number 1300 from the Kremlin. A total clown show. But hey, like I said, some off-brand funnies for today. So if it needs be, I'll cheer you up in the next. So thanks again for watching, guys. Please continue to like and comment. I appreciate it all. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.